And the Spirit immediately drove him, Jesus, into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. I'd like to talk just for a few moments on the theme, facing or confronting our demons in the wilderness. Welcome to the first Sunday of Lent. 40 days of Lent. We talked about it a bit last week. The 40 days of Lent are based on Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. And it harkens back to the children of Israel who wandered for 40 years in the wilderness trying to get to the promised land. Lent, again, is that curious season of the Christian calendar. It is that season when we respond to that tug on our spirit. It was St. Augustine who believed that all people have what he calls a tug on the spirit and a restlessness that calls all of us to God. Like our Muslim sisters and brothers during Ramadan, like our Jewish sisters and brothers during Yom Kippur, Christians typically employ spiritual disciplines of regular prayer and fasting and giving to the poor. Lent is a time of sacrifice in which we are keenly aware of the sacrificial heart of God through Jesus. Lent is the journey to Easter. Christian or not, we know a little bit about this season. One question is in the air. What are you, giving up for Lent? Yes. It's that time when chocolate manufacturers get a little worried because for some reason it seems universal that folks decide to give up chocolate for Lent. Anyway, so we give up everything from chocolate to fried foods to Facebook, TV, smoking, etc., etc. And as we say every year, unfortunately, it's 40 days of time wasted if we sacrifice and deny ourselves embarking upon the ritual for the sake of the ritual. As the theologian Julie Clausen says, Lent isn't about denial, it is about transformation. It is the season in which we prepare to encounter Christ's sacrifice by endeavoring to become more Christ-like ourselves. Transformation is about letting ourselves be filled with God's presence so that we can be shaped by God's grace. So denying ourselves in order to empty ourselves enough to allow God to fill us are means to an end. They are disciplines that prepare us to be transformed. So you see, Lent is supposed to change us. We should not be the same after these 40 days. When we walk in here on Easter Sunday, or actually we won't be here on Easter Sunday, I have to talk about that a little bit later. It's something to do with the academic calendar. But when we come, but Easter is a season, amen, so trust, we will be celebrating. There should be something, though, quite different about us that we can't quite put our finger on. There should be something about you. No, everything is not perfect, but more things are in their rightful place in our lives. There should be something about us, some shift, some lightness where there was only heaviness. Yeah, there should be something about me and about you because God has had God's way with us. Because I've been in the wilderness and I made it out of there. You walk like God's beloved. You talk like you're created in the image of God. So sisters and brothers, do you have any plans for Lent? Maybe it is the giving up of something. Or maybe it is adding something. I don't know. I need to pray more. What about you? I'm not talking about prayer on the fly that I have done sometimes. I'm talking about intentional prayer, important enough to be on my schedule, like everything else. Maybe it's reducing some of the noise in your life, adding an extra hour of studying and reducing an hour of TV, more time checking on family, more attentiveness to friendships and relationships. But if indeed I am giving up chocolate for 40 days, but on that 41st day I have cleaned out every morsel of chocolate in the Price Chopper and the dollar store and candies, then we can safely conclude that I missed the purpose. Do I have a witness to that? Yes. And so we embark upon a 40-day journey of self-examination and introspection. That's where we find Jesus in the text today, in a season of self-examination and in the wilderness. 1 minute he's being baptized by John the Baptist, the heavens open and the Spirit of God in the form of a dove descends. Jesus receives confirmation and affirmation that God has endowed him, appointed him to demonstrate the love of God. The next thing he knows, the same Spirit that anoints him drives and pushes him to the wilderness. As the old folk would say, one moment Jesus is on the mountaintop and the next he finds himself in the valley. Typically, they're speaking metaphorically, but remember his transfiguration up on that literal mountain a week ago, amen? But so many images come to mind when we think of the wilderness. Theologians and scholars through the ages theorize on whether this wilderness was physical or symbolic. A physical wilderness is a part of key stories in the Hebrew Bible. In the Old Testament, the Israelites spent a lot of time in the physical wilderness. God called key leaders like Moses in the physical wilderness. But for most of us today, wilderness is a symbolic state rather than an actual physical place. Some of us have spent time in the wilderness of recovery, the wilderness of academic probation, of divorce. Some of us have been on or are in a financial wilderness, domestic or relationship violence, an eating disorder wilderness, chronic illness that is invisible to others wilderness, a depression wilderness, an anxiety disorder wilderness. Maybe you and your loved ones are anxiously awaiting results from medical tests. When we recall time spent in the wilderness, as one preacher says, we usually think of times when the future feels frightening, when the path ahead is unknown, when all hope seems to have vanished, when we feel completely alone, far from rescue, abandoned by all the things and people we trust. Even though few of us have spent time in an actual wilderness, physical wilderness, we have heard enough to imagine what it is like and to fear it. Do I have a witness today? Wildernesses come in so many different shapes and sizes that the only way you can really tell that you are in one is to look around for what you normally count on to save your life, and you come up empty. One preacher said, no food, no earthly power, no special protection, no backup plan, no plan B or C. You've already used them up. The rainy day fund was used in the last storm. Do I have a witness today? Our sisters and brothers in Flint, Michigan must know something about the wilderness. When an entire community is denied clean water, hence denied life, and not even the neurological problems in their children can move the hearts of some leaders to move with a sense of urgency early on to fix this devastating problem. They gotta know something about a wilderness, and then to find out that there are so many other Flint, Michigans in these not so United States of America. We know something about the wilderness. Do I have a witness today? For many folks, the wilderness suggests a spiritual drought, a time when one feels abandoned by God, a time when one walks away from God, a time when somebody is deeply wrestling with the very existence of God. Sometimes the wilderness is a place where our doubt has gotten the best of us. We're at a crossroads in our lives. Everything is on the line, as well-meaning as they may be. Folks with their pat answers and religious idioms can't appease us anymore. Do I have a witness today? Anybody ever been there? We need to hear from God. Wilderness seems to be a harsh environment physically and spiritually, mentally and emotionally. But you know, it was the Reverend Dr. Luke Bowman. He helped me to consider another view of the wilderness. One of Bowman's professors helped him see that the wilderness, you know, is not to see it as just a bad place. He reminds us that, among other things, especially in the Hebrew Bible, like we just said, the wilderness is where God called folks. God called Moses. The wilderness is where God shaped the people of Israel for 40 years. Far from being a bad place, the wilderness is a holy place in the biblical witness. How many of you know that holy doesn't necessarily mean safe? Do I have a witness today? Not all situations or encounters that change us are without danger. Sometimes we come out on the other side with some scars. Do I have a witness in here today? Jesus, he finds himself in the wilderness, a place, a time where he had to come to terms with God's call on his life. In the midst of this, the text says that Satan was present and tempted him. And we got to stop right there, amen? Because when you say the word Satan or devil, all of our theologies and our traditions come clashing together. Do I have a witness today? Somebody said, oh God, did she say Satan? Amen? You know, it wasn't until, I think I told you all this last year, that until I went to seminary that I discovered that, you know, the many ways that we grapple with the notion of Satan, something that I had taken for granted my entire life because it was so saturated in my life, especially theologically and religiously. This question of, is there a devil? Is the devil or Satan real? Some folks would say, and we used to wrestle, fascinating, there is no such thing, it's a construct of cultures, etc., etc. And I love those conversations because it revealed very quickly the cultural and theological lenses through which we were all looking. And in our debating, we found that the language was problematic. And working through the biblical languages, we found that the word Satan in the Aramaic, one of the Semitic languages probably spoken by Jesus, means adversary. And we didn't need our theology books, our biblical commentaries, our Hebrew and Greek flashcards, or a divinity degree to convince us that humankind and all of creation are up against adversarial forces that seek to deprive us and our planet of abundant life. See, I'm not talking about some ghoulish being. I'm not talking about some figure in red with a pitchfork. Rarely does an encounter with a demon presents itself as a monster. If that were the case, we'd know when to run, amen? But there are adversaries to our wholeness. There are foes that try to keep us off the path of wellness. I know I've got a witness in the house today. There are demons and adversarial spirits and foes that work overtime, trying to keep us from knowing who we are, loving ourselves, and caring and loving others. One theologian tells us rightly that our temptations and demons that attack us don't always come as a frontal assault. It's usually more subtle than that. Sometimes it's the erosion of our will to keep working at our purpose in life. Jim Wallace, founder of Sojourners, writer, political activist, and theologian, he's on his book tour right now for his new book on race, America's Original Sin. And he talked just the other day in his blog about how Pope Francis convicted him deep in his spirit about this Lenten season, and it has convicted me. Pope Francis says, indifference to our neighbor and to God also represents a real temptation for us Christians. but I will suggest all of this. Each year during Lent, we need to hear once more the voice of the prophets who cry out and trouble our conscience. We end up being incapable of feeling compassion at the outcry of the poor, weeping for other people's pain, and feeling a need to help them as though all this were someone else's responsibility and not our own. Indifference to our neighbor. Pope Francis suggests that that's what we should give up. Indifference. We'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks to come, but that convicted me deep in my spirit. If we want to live the life that God intends for us, we, I believe, have to face and confront that troublesome word, our demons. The forces that manifest themselves in many ways. When we confront something, we've usually kind of pined over it. It has probably caused us psychological pain at the very least. It is usually burdensome, always there. And finally, you say, enough. Why? Because something has got to give. Enough. Because running from the issue isn't helping. If it were, we keep on running. Amen? Again, we keep on running. When we confront our demons, we increase the accessibility to wholeness, the path, the door, the window to freedom and wholeness and wellness come into focus, because now there is more than one force at work in me. See, if I leave my adversary unchecked, if I leave my anger unchecked, if I leave my addiction unchecked, my hatred unchecked, if I leave my low self-esteem unchecked, it has full reign over my life. Oh, but when I confront it, whether it is tangible or intangible, the universe moves just a bit. Do I have a witness today? Parker Palmer and Annie Dillard, profound insights on the necessity of confronting our demons. They agree, quote, we have to go down and in and on the way we meet monsters. But if we ride those monsters all the way down, we find the most precious thing of all, the unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for one another, the community we have underneath our brokenness, our life together. We have to ride them down, whatever the language we use, however we may feel about it. This adversary is very real in this text today, but like Jesus, we don't face our demons and resist temptation through our own resources. One theologian reminds us the Spirit does not just drop Jesus off in the wilderness to fend for himself. No. The Spirit continues to abide with him, enabling him to grow stronger through this season. We are never alone in the wilderness. God is with us. Even in this untamed place with wild beasts, Jesus was not alone. The text says that the angels waited on him. See, we just want to be delivered from the wilderness. And sometimes in life, it is clear, I think we understand, it is clear that we have to endure the wilderness. Sometimes the circumstances show us that there is no way out, there's no way around. We just have to go through it. And in our going through, like Jesus, we find our own angels. To my knowledge, we talked about this before, there haven't been many sightings of wings and halos and harps, amen? But I tell you, there are some angels afoot. The one who can get you to laugh as tears are rolling down your face is one of God's angels. The friend holding you because you've got a broken heart. Oh, that's one of God's angels. I haven't heard the little harps they play, but somebody's cell phone rang with a cousin or a dear friend from home calling to say they love you at the very moment you are ready to give up. Do I have a witness? I suggest angels are afoot. I haven't seen the chubby cherub faces, but my door opened and before me was the face of my mentor just checking in because she sensed my struggle. God's got some angels for you in your wilderness